everybody, to another episode of our adoptive foster kinship parenting episodes. I'm here with Dina Shelton and Marissa Sanders. I'm Sky Kirshner. And we were just talking about how we're going to open this video and what kind of images we want to have. And Marissa, you were saying something really interesting because the video editor had originally put in clips of kind of happy young families with younger kids, and you said, "Wait a minute, that's not exactly what's happening out there."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and it's not necessarily representative of what we typically see when we see foster, adoptive, or kinship families. We might see a broad age range. We might see, parents who have older kids and then a really young kid, or just older kids. And part of the reason I brought it up is because we really want to make sure that people are aware that there's a big need for homes for teens in particular. The older kids are, when they come into the system, the harder it is to find them usually a stable placement. They tend to move around a lot, which causes more trauma, which means that every subsequent placement they're in is less likely to be stable and successful long term. So helping families understand that, there is a need for teens for it to be adopted and to be fostered and cared for, and either until they can reunify or be adopted or something. But it's not just, a lot of times when people think of adoption, they think of babies or maybe toddlers. They don't always think of the older kids and the teens.
Marissa, don't you find too that oftentimes the idea of getting a baby, if you adopt a baby, then you're going to avoid a lot of the horror stories that people have told throughout the years? And it's interesting because a lot of those stories are very similar and tend to sound more recycled than anything else, just generalized concepts of when adoptions may be difficult or when fostering may be difficult. And there's this idea that's very much a false idea that if the younger we can get a child into an adoptive home, the easier of a time that child is going to have, because they won't remember. Mm-hmm. And in the last 15, 20 years of counseling research, and especially understanding neurological occurrences and happenings with trauma, and how our bodies are so much more involved in our trauma experiences than just our brains, that our bodies are involved altogether, that we find that there is not actually a decrease in the struggle or the experiences of children who are placed younger. They just look different. Mm-hmm. And they can be overlooked and they can be treated as other things or called other things, but they're just different. Because when you have experiences, when you gained experiences, when you had language to describe them versus not, it categorizes it differently in your mind and body, and being able to process and work through that looks very different as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the things that I find myself telling parents a lot is that trauma doesn't have to be consciously remembered to be exhibited in the body or the behavior, or even have an impact on a child's development or their experience. I mean, it's remembered in the cells. It's there in our bodies and it comes out. And one thing I wanted to just add to what you said is, and I don't know if I'd really thought about it that much, but when you get an older child, often once you get to know them, you have a better sense of who they are, where they've been, what their experiences are, what things they're struggling with. When you get a child who was pre-verbal, or there's a lot of unknowns there, and and it doesn't mean that you can't, in both cases, help to shape their future going forward, but it's not necessarily, like you said, like it's not going to be necessarily easier because they were younger.
No, and a lot of times it ends up becoming a parent responsibility to help build language and to help start the process of grieving, to understand and engage in what's really happening. I tell a story my daughter allows me to tell. She's 12 now, but she was placed with us when she and her brother were 3 and 5. They were about to turn 4 and 6. And I think that she was probably about 6 maybe when this happened. And I was getting ready one morning. She came to the bathroom and I was fixing her hair for school. And she said, and we had done a lot. I'd done a lot to build emotion language in them, insight language, going inside of themselves, taking stock of what's happening and getting it out of them. And she was she did not process very much of what happened at all. Everything was very concrete. It was very, you know, a non-issue for a long time, but I knew it would be at some point. This is going to come up at some point. And I may even have to initiate it, but I was fixing her hair and she said, it's really weird, but sometimes I just feel like there's this hole in my heart. It was just random out of the blue. And I said, yeah. I said, tell me about this hole. And so we talked about it, and we are people of faith. And she said, and I understand that Jesus fills us up, but I feel like there's this other place that has a hole in it. And I said, well, that makes a lot of sense. And so I told her a little bit of her story. I said, when you were a baby, you were born to someone else. And when we are born to people, our bodies and our minds connect to those people. But because things happen, she knew this wasn't new information. Because that happened, and because you were separated from the people that you were supposed to be with from birth, it left a hole in your life and your heart. And when you had parents at one point and they are missing and you get new parents, there's not just one parent space in your heart that people fill. That space is still empty. And we join another space. And so that space is going to feel pretty empty because those people aren't there. And that's a really hard thing to process. And she was 6 and she looked at me and she goes, yeah, I don't think that's it. And I said, okay, you know your heart. So if that's not it, then maybe think about it for a few days. Maybe think about what's going on, and you can talk to me about it again if you want to. You don't have to if you don't want to. And she was like, yeah, I'll think about it, but I don't think that's it. And it was probably about, and I always laugh because this is my favorite stories about how kids process. They're so different from adults. About 3 days later, and I had honestly kind of forgotten about the conversation. I did all my parent anxiety work of, did I do it right? And did I say the right things? And should I have said more? And should I have said less? And I don't know, did I take control of it? Because we do all of those things, right? Even we're trying to do the best that we can. I had calmed all that and said, this is not your story. It's not your life. It's not your process. You're here for her. And this is hers. She's going to process it in her own way. About 3 days later, I was getting ready in the bathroom again in the morning. She popped back in and she asked me a question about getting ready for the day and left, and then popped her head back in. She goes, oh, by the way, the whole hole in my heart thing, it was about those people. And then just like skipped out of the bathroom and left and didn't talk to me about it anymore. And I thought, do I say something else? Like, do we need to process this? I'm a therapist. Yeah, do we need to process this? Is there something that I need to be doing? And I just reminded myself and called, this is her process. Mm-hmm. I have to let her tell me what she needs. This is that attachment thing to it. She has to tell me when she has needs. She came to me and told me there's a hole in her heart. I can trust that she will come to me when there feels like there's holes, and I don't have to prescribe what to do to make it better. I just get to be here and hold it for her. And that was the end of that part of her process. And it went back into a smooth space, and it came up again later, and it sounded different and looked different. But that part was put to rest. It made sense to her all of a sudden.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing that I love that story. The other thing that I find myself having to do in those moments is process it for myself. Because it brings up all those emotions of he's thinking about his other mom, his and where, what is my role in this process for him, but also in my own emotions and my own thinking about our family and our family's origins and all of those issues that come up too.
Yeah, we have to, in our heart of hearts, we have to believe a few key things. Otherwise, in our own hearts and minds, it becomes a competition between us and biological parents. Do they know that we love them more than their biological parents do? That's a really hard thing to put into words, to be honest. It's very vulnerable to even say that because you want to pretend like you don't think those things. Mm-hmm. Am I going to come out the winner?
Yes.
In this story. And that feels gross to say out loud, but it is true. It is a very real experience. It's a very real battle. And so it's that place where, and I always go back to good old Carl Rogers, where he says, Rogers was the big name in therapy in terms of connection between people being a really key place of healing, which we know is key. But he said, if you can't really accept what's there, you can't change it. If you can't call it what it is and you can't really sit with it and accept what's going on with you, you're not going to be able to do a thing about it. And so getting real about that struggle and being able to say those things was part of that process for me of reminding myself, this really is not a competition. It's not. There's no competing to be happening. These are happening in different spaces. And this is what we would call an integrative reality, that my children can love and miss and grieve biological parents and love and appreciate and value me as their mom at the same time. And those are not competing values. They just are not in the same place.
Yeah. And that's such an important message, because it does come up in you, this sort of feeling like it's a competition, or like, what's going to happen when they get mad at me? Are they going to automatically think that they this person would have been a better parent if only they had been with them, and all of those unknowns that come up. And I love your language around the holes in the heart, and there's not just one parent place. My son was 3, I think, when we first started talking about his being adopted, and so I use the term tummy mommy with him. And every now and then it's amazing to me how he processes it, and also how I respond to that. Like, he would come up with sort of outlandish stories like, I saw all the mommies in the world and I picked you. And that I had no trouble accepting, and going, oh, okay, that's a narrative that makes sense to him. He wanted to have some control over it. But then there's other times when we'll be in the car and we'll go someplace that he's never been, and out of nowhere he'll say, my tummy mommy used to live here, or I came here with my tummy mommy. And my first reaction is to go, well, no, that's not accurate. That's not true. Even though when I stop and think about it, I know that he's just adding to that narrative. He's just trying to find something to connect to. And sometimes in those moments, he will say, I didn't want to be taken away from her, or I miss her, or that wasn't, something that I wanted. And I try to just empathize with him in those moments, and, say, I know, and I'm sorry that happened, but it's interesting to me how I react to when it's really sort of outlandish. I'm like, oh, okay, sure, that's fine. But when it's a concrete thing that I know isn't true, I want to correct him, even though he's just processing.
I love what you said about that too, where he says, I didn't want to be taken away. Him putting language, because that is 100% truth, right? We can live in truth. Of course he didn't. And he can put into words now what his precious little body felt at that time. That's trauma process. He's processing that out. And that is a beautiful thing that he has the ability to do while he is young, and integrating that healing through his life, because that is a traumatic experience. No matter when it happens, how old they are, if they were cognitively aware or not, it does not matter. And us being able to commit to consistent and congruent truth is a big thing for me, just in life in general. And I've realized I've had to get even more connected to that as an adopted parent, because being able to say, you have to be able to hold all the truths. You have to be able to hold them in the same space, and it not feel like there's a war inside of you. And so I can say, because and this takes work. It took a little therapy. It took going and processing this out with another grown-up who knows some of what's going on inside of me, right? To be able to say in words, I wish this hadn't happened to you. If I could hit a magic button and undo all of this, I would undo every bit of pain you have to put things back to where they were, because I would do it in a heartbeat for my kids. It would destroy me, but I would do it 100%. And also, I am so grateful for redeeming processes and for things being able to be made right again. I am so thankful. Like I said, we have a very strong Christian faith. And so a lot of our narrative is put through that lens. Any of us that have any type of value systems are going to put things through that lens. And the lens that I use with my kids, when people would tell them, you guys were meant for your mom and dad, man, God wanted you to be with them. And I would rewrite that for them and say, that is not correct. I don't believe that for one second. Because if that was the real plan, the first plan, you'd have been born to us. And that doesn't cheapen what we have. Plan B and plan C is not bad. We've talked about this. I think I've even shared this language, and that's where I go back to it for my kids, of it didn't have to be right all along to be right now. Yeah. And then we get to be grateful for that.
And something I think I'm realizing as we're talking is that I think one of my big fears as a foster and adoptive parent was that the processing of trauma for my son would come out in those anger moments, right? That it would come out in the moments when there was tension and he was mad at me. And so there would be this comparison that would kind of heighten that competition. But what I'm seeing now, that may change when he's a teenager. He's only 6. So maybe this will intensify more. But what I'm seeing right now is that a lot of that dialogue is happening in very what feel to me as random moments, they probably aren't for him. There's probably some trigger, but they're happening not in those intense emotional, moments of struggle or tension, but in just sort of moments when we're traveling or moments when we're outside walking or, just kind of times when he feels comfortable, I suppose, bringing it up. But to me, that's comforting to know that it's him processing, and it's easier for me to see that as him processing rather than him expressing anger at me or comparing us or, those kinds of things.
And it probably will come out at some of those times, right? Especially as he gets older and the emotions are bigger and the impulsivity is greater just through puberty and that type of thing. It may come out in some of those moments. It may not.
Right.
But you're decreasing the likelihood that that's how it will need to come out. We spew when things are too big, when it has to come out. Stuff has to come out of us. And it can come out through words, regular process words. It can come out through angry words. It can come out through substance use and shoving it down. It can come out through abusing and hurting other people. It can come out through other types of actions and behaviors. It's going to come out. It's going to get processed some way. And so when you create a norm in your home that it is appropriate and okay to process it as it comes up, you decrease the likelihood that it will need to bubble up and come out in angry moments. And that doesn't become part of your discipline issues. It becomes just part of your process together as a family. And that changes that narrative altogether.
I love that.
You guys are just blowing me away here. The complexity and the sort of emotional maturity, the emotional intelligence that you need to be able to navigate this. And it reminded me of that idea of whether you see love as a scarce resource or an abundant resource, and because many of us who are in like a scarcity mentality, well, I only have so much love and I can only give so much of it away, versus the idea that, paradoxically, love is one of these things that grows. The more you give it away, the more you have to give. But what an incredible story, Dina. And, to be able to have the clarity in your mind of what your role is, what your place is. And I love what you were saying, Marissa, that of course, and Dina, of course, there's that possessive kind of love that wants to say, I want to be number one, or, this is a competition and I want to win. And versus this sense that it's, that there's this whole thing that's being worked out here in these interactions. And like Marissa said, it's a process. And I need to keep reminding myself, this is a process. Wow, I'm just blown away. And just to go back to the jumping off point, so I do think that there probably is a sense that teens are the hardest to bring in. And you all are saying, and Dina, you're saying, no, it's just different. And hard is sort of some kind of function of what your expectations are and all, 100 other variables that, some of them maybe we can predict and some we can't. But just because you have a younger kid or if your hopes are for a younger child to bring into your family, that's not necessarily a guarantee that that this is going to be an easier road to travel.
That's exactly right. And you can't predict and control this enough to get the right type of scenario for it to go how you imagine it going.
Mm.
But I would say the exact same thing to a pregnant woman who is going to be giving birth soon. There's no predicting and controlling from pregnancy on. And we have this imaginary dichotomy that having a child, getting pregnant and birthing a child and bringing that child into the world and raising it is somehow a more stable and secure process than adopting or fostering a child. And while it is 100% accurate that there are issues that can arise in foster and adopt that are not likely to arise in biological parenting, there are so many things that happen in biological parenting and biological family systems that completely throw off the narratives. I have a friend whose daughter was diagnosed with a serious physical illness when she was 13. that may end her life early. And so that type of thing changes a family system. It is something they will process. It is trauma, it is grief. And there are things that are going to look a lot more similar to some of the things that we go through as foster and adoptive parents. We just don't tend to think about that in the whole scope of things. There's no predicting and controlling family to make it go the way that we imagine in some type of fairy tale world. It's people, it's humans.
Yeah. Yeah, that's such a good point that, there's just, I'm thinking back to some of the narratives that I was told when I first started into foster care and started looking into it and getting certified and everything. And I remember, and I definitely wanted a baby at some point, but I was also open to older kids. And, there was this part of me that went, I want the kids nobody else wants, and all of those kind of rescuer mentalities that a lot of us tend to come into it with.
Marissa, can I time you out here? So we're just about at 20 minutes. How about if we hold this one? Let me just pause and we'll start a new episode, because I think this is a whole nother topic. So on behalf of Marissa Sanders and Dina Shelton, I want to thank you for being with us and join us for the next episode.